Welcome back to the Zachrilege cast. Marissa, Alexa, McCool. Third time's the charm.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not used to hearing your voice and not hearing it start with that song you sing, so I'm a little disappointed.
I know. Welcome back to the show. Okay. These are
There we
not
go.
out of context was such a brand thing, but I haven't really been taking people out of context lately. So I'm going to put some quotes that are from your book, the book we'll be discussing in a minute. And I don't think they're all from you, but you'll probably know immediately who it's from. You are so fucking gay.
That could be from anybody.
Yeah. Because testosterone is monochrome and estrogen's a plasma screen.
Yeah, I think you're overestimating how much of the book I have memorized.
Right. God loves everyone except for people I don't agree with politically, socially, religiously, sexually, or philosophically.
Yeah, I definitely know who wrote that one. That one's one of mine.
And last one, even in 2018, our visibility is difficult, and it is to be visible is dangerous.
Yeah, somber there. Visibility is difficult for a number of different groups of people right now, as we're finding out from detention camps.
Yeah, if only someone had written a book kind of predicting it. That would be you. But let's talk about your latest book, Once Unspoken. This book is dedicated to Benedict Frank and Brennan Ebel. Who are they?
Benedict Frank and Brennan Ebel are unfortunately two 19-year-old boys who were murdered. And two of the contributing authors wrote pieces in the book. So Karen Evans is someone I did not know and reached out to me about working on the project. And this was the first book I ever had where people who I didn't already have connections with were reaching out to me to participate. But my friend Melissa Frank, their son was murdered pretty brutally in January, and they were very active in the March for Our Lives campaign, and I'd been following everything they'd been saying about Benedict, and I didn't know him personally, but I knew Melissa, and I was following everything that they were posting about, especially the incident at the morgue, and every single thing they wrote just not only stuck in my brain, but just hit like a ton of bricks. So, that was definitely one of the voices I wanted to feature, because that's not a perspective I feel that is amplified enough, especially in media with gun violence. There's always a lot about what caused the shooting, what was the shooter's problem, mental illness, or crisis actors, or whatever it is. And then a lot of attention is also paid to how can we make this someone else's fault without talking about guns. But at the after all of that fades and we move on to the next piece of news, which anymore is 6 or 10 minutes, there's still a family left who lost somebody, and in this case a son who did nothing more than play video games near a person who decided that because he couldn't die in a war like a quote-unquote real man, he had to kill himself, and he decided to take a 19-year-old child with him.
Yeah, there's one thing for someone to deal with trauma that a lot of people can't relate to, but to actually write about it, it's brave. And almost had to ask, it's like, how many times when you're reading these submissions did you just have to like break down? This is a lot of the stories are very emotional.
Pretty much every one of them, even the happy ones, because when it was people I knew how important it was to say what they were going to say, especially the anonymous ones. I know who they are, obviously, but the anonymous case about being in such a domestically abusive household that she started using household chores as a way to create her own little world. And whether or not I actually knew this person, which I do, I was sitting there just, it's the subtext title of the book should really be trigger warning, because most of these pieces are not easy to read. And then all the ones from the other kids from this year's Vagina Monologues production, which there are a fair amount, just thinking about the fact that these are 20-year-old kids who are writing stuff. I, being a part of that show and me having the chance to say my own words, and so many of them not being able to, and instead reading words that were, you know, I have nothing against Eve Ensler's show for the most part, and I agree it was very important. But the inspiration behind this book to me was to let people tell their stories and not listen to them, interview them, and then interpret them into my own writing. So amplifying their voices was really important to me as well.
Yeah, you almost answered the next question. This is kind of the usual lead question you have since you've done a few interviews about the book. How the Vagina Monologues kind of led to this book and kind of an opportunity to give people who don't get to talk an opportunity to talk about stuff people don't always hear.
Yeah, and once again, I am not saying it's a bad show, but I am saying it's a bit outdated, especially on college campuses. It was written in the 90s, and there are an awful lot of people who don't feel represented there. There were probably 70 people in this show, and the previous year, I was seriously the first transgender person ever included in 17 years of the show, despite the fact that there is a trans monologue. And I was invited back as a spotlight speaker to perform my own piece, but I was hearing these kids tell their own stories, and that they couldn't do it themselves on stage, or they couldn't even have a line added. The girl who ended up writing the foreword, Magana, she was dressed in full sari and just wanted to include the line, "My sari is not an excuse to fetishize me," and had to fight for it. So I sort of rededicated the intro that I had to introduce the piece to say that I am one woman, but there are 70 stories up here, and all of them deserve the chance to be heard. And many of them used this opportunity to tell their own story, some of them anonymously, but it is valid. So seeing that the Vagina Monologues is such a different piece than most theatrical pieces, it's all about owning sexuality, talking about abuse and survival, and in a very direct way that most people weren't used to hearing. But when you have a theater full of 20-year-olds and there's nothing about social media, there's nothing about school violence, there's nothing about a lot of the issues that they're facing, and there's also not a lot of diversity and inclusion going on with non-white queer voices. I mean, the one most famous monologue that's supposed to be about a woman of color is called Coochie Snorcher, and it's just like, that seems trivial when, you know, so many women of color are facing racism and violence, and especially trans women of color who have a life expectancy of 35. It seems a little reductive. So it was really important to me to make sure those voices got heard and they got to tell the stories themselves, not filter them through the lens of somebody who was already writing. And with all due respect to Eve Ensler, that's what she did, was interview people and then write her own story.
So clearly you're looking at something that could take the place or at least be a little more flexible. But you mentioned your forward author, Magana. I'll try not to pronounce her name. How did she get to be in that spot? Like, you mentioned a little bit about, you know, her story and how you kind of got her. She got your attention and vice versa.
Magana is one of the most incredible people I've ever met. She is Southeast Asian and very, very outspoken. And backstage, the first thing she said to me was how cis central or cis normative the show was. And I was not expecting that. And we ended up getting into a conversation. And later she spoke to the group about how she didn't feel included in that space, that the space didn't feel welcoming to brown and black people. And never mind the fact that, like, trans men aren't even included in the show at all. And they have vaginas. Why are they invisible? So, you know, we kind of had that moment of, let's start our own show with blackjack and hookers. And after the show, At the end of that show specifically, I don't know if it happens at everyone. There's a what's called a call to rise, and everybody who has ever been the victim of sexual violence stands up silently. And everything sort of hit for me because I've written extensively about my own stories with sexual violence, and it was just as hard this year. But when I got backstage, I was talking to Magana again, and I said, "Yeah, last year I remember I nearly fell over because I was crying so hard, and someone who was wearing a sari held me up and held my hand and made sure." And she goes, "Yeah, that was me." And I said, "I didn't want to assume, but wow, that just makes this more awesome." And I just everything she said that night, I said, I need you to write the foreword. Your voice needs to be heard. It is so powerful, so concise, and unapologetic. And I can't explain enough just how much of an impact this person had on me in a very short amount of time. And then between uh, working on the book and when the book came out, she won the Fulbright scholarship. So she one day is gonna, have this as a footnote, and she'll be like, "Oh, remember my friend Rissy?" Like she's going places, and she is going to make such a tremendous difference in this world. And I'm just honored that I, by chance, got the opportunity to work with her and know such an incredible person.
I saw one of your cats making a cameo appearance in the background. That's how it goes.
Yep, yep. And then two of my partners are back there just hanging out. So
This is just how it goes in the Rissy household. So for you, you've done books where you've asked for submissions before, but you've had submissions from people that you've kind of known. What was it about this book and what you're trying to convey that made you say, okay, let's get some guest authors who are strangers to you before publication?
I put out an open call. That was part of it. There's a trans writers group, for instance, that is run by a fellow trans author of a friend of mine named Dharma Kelleher. And I posted the open call because, first of all, I wanted to get Dharma Kelleher involved, but also I figured if there's any place to try to get more trans people to speak out, it's in a group called Writing While Trans. And not only did people from the group respond, but that call got forwarded to people who had no connection to that whatsoever. And also the fact that after the show, I sent an email to the director of the show saying, anybody from this show who wants to participate in this, you're more than welcome to. I want to amplify your voices. And of course, I didn't have time to get to know all 70 something of those women there. So naturally, some of them were strangers to me. And combining those two things alone, it was the idea of the call and the reason I was doing it. The whole point of this book was to amplify the voices of queer folks, trans folks, and people of color, and some who are all three. So I feel like that resonated with a lot of people who may have been a bit blasé about the vagina monologues. And I heard about plenty of them from people in the cast who say, yeah, my trans friends don't want to come because it doesn't include them. Or, the people of who are saying, yeah, this show doesn't seem like it's about us. So that it wasn't difficult. People reached out to me and told me their stories and asked if I would include it. And I universally said yes. So, like, for instance, Renee James is a trans woman who was in Vietnam. That's a story I would never be able to tell because I don't know what it was like to be in Vietnam, and it would be foolish for me to assume so. So she tells that story in the book. I don't know what it's like to be a trans woman of color, but Princess Harmony does. I didn't grow up in Latinx culture. So I know what social norms are like, but I don't know what that culture and the pressure to fulfill gender norms is like. And I feel like all of those different experiences, I think there's at least 6 different countries represented outside of the US, just from people who submitted. Um, I feel like the more perspectives we take into account here, whether it's identity or race or sexuality or sometimes just a unique story that needs to be told that people can relate to. That was the purpose behind this. And in previous books, it was more about having additional people talk about the theme. In this one, it was, I want your story. Here's a place where you can tell it.
Well, what was it like reading stories? And you kind of mentioned this already in your last answer, from people who were trans during a time where there wasn't even dial-up internet. You know, it was 20 years before that, and people from different. It's not only different gender backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds, but age backgrounds too.
It's difficult, no doubt. I feel like sometimes there's a lot of distance between trans people of the generation that had the transition in the 90s or before that there is now. And that's not to say our experiences are minimized, but the trans women that I've spoken to who came out and even had surgery in the 90s, they didn't have access to the information the way we did. They had to get it from magazines or from Dharma specifically talks about finding her fairy drag mother, and all the gatekeeping you had to go through. Most people didn't even know trans was a thing in the 90s. Some people still don't know it's a thing now, but it becomes really difficult because back then the word transsexual was used, and most trans people who are my age or younger distance themselves from that word. So, and there's also the cultural difference where, for the most part, depending on where you live, you can be trans and open about it and not have to always be on your guard and fear violence. But back in the 90s, you had to assimilate and quote unquote pass as cis just to survive, because it hasn't been fully rectified yet. But back then, if someone murdered a trans person, it was kind of like, well, they probably had it coming. So I like seeing these experiences that I relate to, because I know the level of privilege I've been given in many circumstances, and I recognize that many have not or do not have that. And if anything, I hope the stories can give the people out there now hope that they can come out and be safe and have a community that accepts them. There's one, I don't know if she ended up participating, but she came out at 68. And that's a really brave thing to do. It's coming out at all is a brave thing to do, but when you've lived that much of your life hiding, to say that this is who I am and this is what I need to do, and I don't care what age I am, that is a different level of brave that I can only hope to one day aspire to.
Well, we can't complete tonight's show without giving people a taste, because we're going to tell them how to get the book later. That's right, people. You have to wait. But you have a couple of selections from the book that you want to read?
Yes, and one of them is from Leha's piece, Spoon Hunter, who was at Standing Rock. And if trans people of color have been minimized, then indigenous people in general, and especially indigenous queer people, are all but invisible. And it was very important to me to include their voices, even though one of the Two-Spirit activists I had slated could not participate. I still included their name in the book because it meant that much to me to have their representation. So Leha's piece is called True to Spirit. In the society in which I grew up, men needed to be strong and play sports. Some considered anything else evil and contrary to the Bible. I learned social norms that men marry women and raise children. I felt that if I spoke of who I really was, I would not be accepted. But this is who I am. I am a proud Native American. I recognize our traditions, our cultural way of life, and our spirituality is at the heart of who I am. In the early years of my culture, people like me were accepted. We were elevated as spiritual and cultural beings. We played an important role in our tribes, possessing both male and female traits. I believe we should never judge someone for who they love, and I am truly proud of who I am. I hope someday I will get to love who I choose, both men and women. I am Two-Spirit. Ever since I chose to be the person I truly am, and who the Creator made me to be, I have found this life to be a blessing. Even though I have faced negativity for my choice to rise above gender norms, I have also found complete love and compassion from many supporters and family. The work isn't to gain recognition for myself, but create a brighter future for Indigenous youth where they won't be judged for who they love, what they choose to wear, or their gender. This journey has led me to the White House, to other Indigenous communities, and to hearing an American president say the word Two-Spirit. And they did. They have a picture with President Obama right on their profile. Back when getting to go to the White House was actually a good thing.
I was thinking that it probably wasn't the current president. Yeah.
No. Two-Spirit to that president probably means a second martini. So this one is a piece that I wrote called "A Year as Myself," which I wrote this year to read to the group at the Vagina Monologues, because we get to read or say anything we want before those shows, as I said. And I decided to start the book with this, despite it being named after the one I wrote last year as my coming out piece. When I was 16 years old, a guy named Will said that I would one day be working for him. Going to community college was going to land me a job with someone like him signing my paychecks. When I was 28 years old, a girl named Amanda, convinced I was a fetish, someone to be used, she used me for her own entertainment and pleasure. She put her hand around my throat after I said no, after I'd resisted, after I said I didn't want it, and she choked me until I stopped resisting. It seems like a different lifetime when those words were spoken, to a false representation of a person I pretended to be. For that person's name is not the one inscribed on my Penn diploma. I didn't go to graduation because the previous year a certain man was in attendance about whom I'd written a book that started with the words "fuck you." I did attend LGBT graduation, where I listened to a speech that lauded Penn's inclusivity and protections that included gender identity. I was then followed into the bathroom, despite having a friend with me, despite having that friend vouch for me, and I was questioned, humiliated, embarrassed, ashamed. My friend's word wasn't enough. My word wasn't enough. My name wasn't enough. My ID wasn't enough, because someone supposedly saw a guy go in there. And Marissa, she said, could be a gender-neutral name, apparently. 3 months earlier, I'd stood on this very stage, performing under my true name, my true identity, my true self, with my words published in the program proclaiming who I am loudly, proudly, and assertively. I am Marissa. In this place, on this stage, while shooting video for the football team, backstage before each show, on Locust Walk, on my diploma, in the articles in the Daily Pennsylvanian, on my book, my podcasts, on Canvas, on my Pen ID. But after all that, there I stood because a security guard in the cafeteria didn't believe my friend who said I was who I was. Didn't believe me when I said I was who I was, and didn't believe the name that was emblazoned on book covers and podcast lists. At that moment, I was only a suspicion. If that's what it's like for someone known and protected by the institution itself, a trans girl who doesn't have a platform, the friends in the theater, or access to a voice, or the safety to scream in a hate pastor's face, she's the one I think of most, the one who's gone with me this past year. Had that adamant "fuck you" come from someone aged 18 instead of 31, it can't be understated the regret that seeps in upon knowing who you truly are and wondering. Those 13 years spent barely visible in the closet could have been spent protecting someone who didn't have a closet to hide in. I spent that year traveling the country, speaking words but hearing more. In Hickory, North Carolina, a father confessed to me the difficulty he through and learned trans meant because his daughter was trans. I had spoken had helped him learn how to love his daughter for who she was instead of who he thought she was. I performed a cold open in Allen, fast delivering a poem I'd written and deciding to use that. My words reached people in a way they never could have before I was me, because the real me was the one who had been asked to give them. I received a standing ovation in Carlisle for the piece I'd written, partially published in this program at their script. The only people who had heard me say it prior to this day were the ones joined in this private circle before this show last year, the first show in 17 years of Penn V Day to include trans people. I walked in Salt Lake City as no less than 20 people shouted slurs as they drove or passed by. I spoke to Flint natives and indigenous folk from Standing Rock on a summer day in Michigan, wondering why I was the one speaking when they had stories to tell. Botanical gardens in Gainesville as a trans girl also DM'd me for I'd helped her after I told her I'd helped her complete the fundraising she needed for bottom surgery. A trans girl in Scotland who told me that my weekly show of trans jokes helped her get through the roughest year of her life. The professor who took me to dinner to learn more about our community, to be a better ally. My internet son who can't be himself because his birth parents have put the condition on him that love comes with a price. The abuse survivor who told her story on my show to help others avoid the same situation. A non-binary person meeting me in Seattle at a show for other podcasters I'd once thought out of my league, but had since befriended me. They fell in love with me and moved to St. Paul to keep an eye on me when my husband needed a break from dealing with my overwhelmingly wifely ass. My girlfriend, the raven-haired songbird who tells me I'm beautiful even when I don't feel like it, and who will also protest her value at deserving to be in this piece. And of course, the man who made me his wife, because he fell in love with the person and the gender didn't matter. When I wrote my piece a year ago for this show, it was filled
We lost connection.
but I also feel guilt, which transfers to rage, because for all the luck I've received in my transition and journey, for the platforms I've been given, the space in people's headphones, the words on hundreds of pages, why did it take screaming in a hate pastor's face, going to a school that defends when it comes on the Trans Day of Remembrance is one more name that didn't have to be there. Whether it's because comedians still defend using us as punchlines, because ignorant people think they know better, because well-intentioned people want an ally cookie, or because people think we deserve to die for existing. I should not be treated better just because I'm the first trans person that you ever met in person, and therefore could put a face on the issue. How about treating us fairly because we're fucking people, and not because of meaning I've somehow earned it in your eyes? When trans people tell you who they are, believe them. When someone tells you their pronouns, believe them. When someone tells you their name, believe them, even if you're against the singular they. We don't have to get surgery to be who we are. We don't have to go on hormones to be who we are. We don't have to pass by your standards to be who we are. I speak now because so many can't. And in November, we'll have to read another list of names because others will never have the chance to. Help us reduce that list. Help us, respect us, believe us. All of us, not just me, because I wouldn't have the chance to speak here without so many others fighting and dying in the process for our right to not be murdered, raped, discriminated against, exiled, hated, told we're mentally ill, dead named, misgendered, harassed, assaulted, beaten up, bullied, mocked, punchlined, or otherwise harmed for no other reason than existing. Help us reduce that list. Help us keep them safe. Don't wait until we're standing there to defend us to your friends. Correct them. Stand up for us. We are here. We exist. We are valid.
That is just very powerful. Although my internet wasn't very powerful, so I may have lost you for a moment during that.
Oh no, I hope not.
That's the way it goes on the live internet highway. But you mentioned, I mean, you get out there in a way that I don't think I could pull off. Like, why do you think it's so important for you to talk so openly about who you are, what you've been through, and even some personal stuff that people wouldn't always share?
Because without people like me doing that, the only information people get about trans people are from Fox News or whoever's yelling about us. I can tell you, just in the years between when I first started to come out and when I came out, and since then, I've seen the rhetoric change so much because trans people are speaking up. But we still got a long way to go, even just for visibility, let alone anything else. And I can't just go to the places where I'm comfortable. I can't just speak to people who already agree with me. So I go to places like Salt Lake City or, the South, and even conservative places in Michigan that I've been to and will go to again because they need to hear it too. if we only talk to people who already agree with us, we may help ourselves in our. But I try to think of the trans kids that live in places like Huntsville, Alabama, or Nashville, Tennessee, or Salt Lake City, or any of the other places where there aren't ordinances protecting who they are, or their right to not be fired or discriminated against. And even in the places where it's protected, it's still dangerous at times because you never know who heard something on Alex Jones and is looking for the first person they can to take it out on us. So I put myself out there because I can, because I live in a place where trans people are protected on a local and state level, because I have the ear of enough people that people listen to me, because I have a piece of paper from a very highly regarded institution saying that I know stuff, and because I'm a white trans woman. So unfortunately, people are more likely to take it that way, which is why I try to give as much of a voice as I can to non-white trans people, because for all the shit that white trans people have to deal with, it is so much worse for trans people of color. It's just a matter of trying to do as much good for as many people who can't or won't speak up for themselves because they don't feel safe, because they might, lose their parents or their job or their spouse. I've had far too many emails that I've read where it's, I'm trans, but if I say anything, I'm not going to have a place to live. Or trans people who are homeless that I've interviewed, or just any amount of danger that people are put in for being who they are. And because I'm not in that danger, because I have a home and we all work and we live in a place like this, and I've had some unbelievable opportunities because of how much work I put out there. If I wasn't using that to try to give voices to those who don't have one person supporting them when I have thousands, it would be those who believed what I said.
Well, obviously, for you crank out a ton of content, and the first, of course, book I had heard of you, the first one was the PC Lie, but I hear there is a sequel coming out. How's that going? We got a frozen moment here. Gonna wait and see.
Okay.
Sorry, we lost connection for a second. Let me go ahead and ask the question again. Internet's not great, but I'm having storms where I am, so that's probably why. I was just asking about PC Lie 2 and how that's going, and of course, when's your next book coming out, and how's it going? Yeah. Do we have an outage?
Okay, let's try this question a third time.
Yeah. So your next book is the PC Lie 2. How's that going?
Well, and I've been doing something different with it, which is offering discounted pre-orders for the ability to watch it as it's written. So for those who pre-order it, I have a Google Drive file that I send to all of them as each chapter is upgraded. But I really felt it necessary to go back to that moment of rage that I had when I wrote that book, and the feelings we were all having at the time about not knowing what was going to happen and being terrified. And thankfully, we were all just being paranoid, and we should have given him a chance. So literally, the title of the book is "The PC Lie: Can We Stop Giving Him a Chance Yet?" And I would say this one has come after the almost 2 years it's been since I wrote that book, and more it's expounding on what the situation is like now as compared to what it was then, but it's also talking about some things that have sort of become more prevalent since then, like incels, like JBP. I won't even say his fucking name. Like the fact that the secular community has had sort of a split where they're going all in with shitlordery. And right, I think at a certain convention that's coming up somewhat near me. They're having a panel on the impact of intersectionality, and it's 4 white men, but it's okay. They're diverse. One of them doesn't have a beard. So that's been more the direction.
Yeah.
That's been more the direction I've been going with that one. I'm 7 chapters in, and I've gotten very good reviews on the essays that I've written for it. And one of them I'm going to use to read at the Free Thought Alliance convention in August, which I will be a speaker. And I'm also going to pitch it to certain places like, say, ReasonCon.
Yeah, I've heard of that place.
Yeah, it's almost like we met there.
I know. We were so young. You had, I think around the time of the last ReasonCon, you had an anniversary, 100th episode was coming up, but you're about to go to number 150. What's happening there, and why have you chosen the location?
Well, at episode 100, I formally introduced my new co-host, Bethany Futrell from Chicago. And because I had everybody come out to where I was living at the time, which was central Pennsylvania, it seemed only fair that we have the next show in her neck of the woods. And Chicago is also a much bigger population area. So we thought we could get more people who would be willing to come. And so far, I would say that's been a success. Another focus we wanted to have was that there are more atheists than straight cis white men. No offense, my friend. So on the show, it's Mandisa Thomas, Stephanie Zvan, Jenica Krail, and Alex Jules. So the focus of the show is going to be those kind of perspectives on where everything is right now, and hopefully what we can do to reverse all the damage that's been done so far, assuming that, Kim Jong-un isn't literally in the White House by that time, because after that, I don't know what else could happen. And if I've learned anything from the last 2 years, it can never go too low, and it can never surprise you anymore. So we will be having a 150th episode live in Chicago at the Den Theater with those 4 guests. And as far as I know, tickets are still available. They may be close to selling out because a lot of people have told me they're coming. And there might be something special going on there too, like there was at the first one. I don't know. Maybe someone in this room has plans for something. I don't know. I'm not in on that sort of thing.
Well, it just gives people something to look forward to. So we can't cover, every show that you produce or every show that you speak on, but will the cis ever not be out of hand?
That's up to you guys.
As a spokesperson, I can say,
I mean, so many people have made a lot of progress, and we do have some tremendous allies, but at the same time, there are especially fucking TERFs that go out of their way to try to organize violence and harassment against us. And the administration, I think, is averaging 1 law a month that they're either reversing or changing that affect us. So as we constantly say, me and Ari on the show, we don't want to do this show, but you keep making us do it. So until this trajectory at least changes a little bit, I think we're going to have plenty of material for a while to come. And I'm on some level, I'm glad for it, because that show is trans happy hour for me. Like, it's just 1 hour where I can vent and laugh about things. And we even had an episode where we asked people to volunteer to be roasted, and it turned out to be our best downloaded show ever. So clearly the formula is making fun of the people we love with consent.
Self-hating sisses. I like this. There could be something there.
Yeah.
We're going to get to the kind of random questions section of the show. So you posted a while back. Now, you used to be a professional wrestler and used to write a column about wrestling. What happened with wrestling? Did you have to quit?
I didn't have to. I just started really getting burnt out on the product itself. But then, right about the time that was happening, the company that likes to advocate how much it is for family entertainment and, is all about not being a bully with their Be a Star campaign, decided to dress 3 guys up in girls' clothes and then just have the commentators ruthlessly say horrific shit. And it it was something that might have been gotten away with in the 90s on a Springer episode, but in 2018, people should know better, and it's not fucking funny anymore. So if there was any chance of me going back to it after the hiatus I was on, I think it's done. And I very explicitly wrote a letter to the company saying I was canceling my subscription and I would not promote or give them any more of my attention until they grew the fuck up a little. So that was just a matter of things changed in my life, and I wasn't really happy writing about it anymore anyway, because I was doing so much other stuff, and that was the final nail in the coffin for me, especially for a place in a piece of industry where a majority of it is very harsh and toxic toward anyone who doesn't fall into a certain set of norms.
Okay, we have had a couple of questions, so I'm going to ask you to pick odd or even. We'll go random on this one.
Odd, because that seems fitting.
Is Minnesota a queer trans paradise?
Yes, especially the Twin Cities. We have legal protection here, as I said earlier. A lot of the places you go to have gender-neutral single-use bathrooms. Even when I've gone to use a couple of them at restaurants, places where if I would get strange looks in Pennsylvania or other places, there it's just like, oh, I like your lipstick. And I had an issue with someone incorrectly addressing me, and I went to HR about it, and they said, we will not tolerate this. So those 2 things alone make it better than most places in this country to be. But the amount of gay in this area is just plentiful. And the Twin Cities Pride alone is massive. It takes up a whole area of downtown. So it's really good to be here. And it's, nobody's completely safe, obviously. But I can walk down the street wearing not subtle clothes. And generally, I don't have to worry around here.
Now, to prepare for tonight's episode, I had to listen to a few of your interviews, and I could tell that some of the people hadn't totally read your book. I'm just saying. But this is a question based on one of those interviews. How does one suck a fuck?
That's actually a reference to a movie that some people still remember called Donnie Darko.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a scene in the beginning where Donnie Darko calls his sister a fuck ass, and then she says, you can go suck a fuck. And he goes, so please tell me, Elizabeth, how exactly does one suck a fuck? And I don't know, it's just one of those weird phrases that just worked for the moment when I wrote that little Callie-like ending thing that I try to say at the end of every show.
That's perfect. Now, I try to ask my guests now, and I don't know if the second time you're on, I think this was a thing, but and I didn't ask you in advance, so this is putting you in the spot. Do you have a joke to share with the audience?
I sure do, and it's one of my favorites.
Okay.
So you walk up to a trans girl couple, and you say, okay, which one of you is the sub, and which one of you is the dom pretending not to be a sub?
Excellent. Well, okay, first of all, how do people get your book? And then how do people follow you and all of your many endeavors? And of course, if you're anywhere near the Chicago area and you have the date of your show as well, let people know. And all links will be in the show notes, by the way.
Yep. So the live show is on June 23rd at the Den Theater in Chicago. Tickets are available at the link I will provide or on the Facebook page for Inciting Incident. I host the Inciting Incident podcast, the Sister Getting Out of Hand podcast, and I just started a new one, which is all about sex called the Rissy Slut List. So that one only has one episode out, but that's been a new thing that I've been using on a Facebook filter. And my book, I will provide a link that you can get it directly from me signed, or you can get it on Amazon or any bookstore that is capable of ordering books. And all 6 of them are available that way. But I definitely, I always give the link if people want it signed and directly from me, because Amazon gives you a chunk, but not very much of the cost. So pretty much, if you want to find any of my work, just put my name, Marissa Alexa McCool, into your podcast app or to Amazon, and you'll find stuff. I also produce 5 other podcasts in which I host them, not host as in I'm on them, but I provide them a platform and help them out. That's Secular Soup, FTM for Trans Men, The Interesting Life of Pris, and as well as I'm blanking on a couple of them. Beyond Gender, and I'm blanking on one of them. I'm terrible. Man Yells at News. That's it.
I was like, I've had a lot to guess on, and of course, my Secular Soup mug. I haven't had beer out of it yet. I should probably try that some week, but you probably get this. My mug tends to be full of cat fur.
Yeah, my Secular Soup mug is currently full of the little Rissy doll that my friend Lene made for me for Christmas this year. So little Miss Rissy is just sitting in a bowl of soup.
I feel like that's a perfect way to conclude the show. And also, since it is Pride Month, I want to say congratulations for making Brian Fisher angry and stealing the rainbow from God. So thank you, Marissa Alexa McCool, for being on the show tonight. It's been great, and people should read your book because it's great.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad to come back anytime.
Perfect.